Does anyone know how to record this? I'm hoping it's recording already. Sorry, I shouldn't be asking you. It's not very professional.
Persephone and Cassandra, Atlas and Prometheus, oligarchy, plutocracy, satire, irony, hubris, nemesis, pathos, catharsis, sour grapes and blowing hot and cold, opening Pandora's box and leaving no stone unturned, the myths, tales and concepts of ancient Greece echo and reach into every aspect of modern life. Often misunderstood, frequently romanticized, and sometimes deliberately twisted. To understand their origins and truth is to get a real glimpse into the universal themes that connect us to the past and to each other. This is their story.
Άμα θέλεις μάνα δίρε με, άμα θέλεις μάνα δίρε με, πάλι εγώ θα βγαίνω στην αυλή για να βλέπω τον Αλεξανδρή.
Welcome to Podyssey. I'm Alex Andreou. Each time we take one myth, one concept, person, place, theme from ancient Greece, take it apart, figure out its inner workings, trace its tentacles, juice it for wisdom, update, reconfigure, and put it back together all shiny and new. And from this season, subscribers get to have a live online session with me and a different one of the show's experts each time to explore every episode further and ask any questions they might have.
'Tis the gift to be simple, 'tis the gift to be free, 'tis the gift to come down where we ought to be.
Some things only come together after the episode is out there and I can discuss it with people. For example, when I included the unusual idea that the fennel stalk, the method of passing on the fire of knowledge, was a vital and completely underexplored element of the Prometheus myth, it seemed kooky.
Not be ashamed to turn will be your delight, till by turning we come.
But then I started to see it everywhere, in the sharing of the candlelight during Greek Easter, in Diwali's diyas and Ramadan's fawanis, in using a flame as a trataka to meditate, in the statue that stands over New York Harbor bringing liberty from the old world to the new, in the flame emoji used in cryptocurrency token burning, in the flame that leads Scrooge to enlightenment and Little Match Girl to peace, in E.T.'s life-giving index finger, in the Winter Olympics opening ceremony where a torch carries an actual idea from antiquity to modernity. We just held the first such live session on Prometheus and I hope you will agree it was wonderful, wide-ranging, informal, funny and challenging. We talked through everything from the etymology of the name Prometheus to Spurs appointing a new manager. It has convinced me that this is a feature which will grow and grow. And if you want to be part of the next one on Pandora and receive the illustrated guide to each episode, sign up now as a monthly supporter on ko-fi.com/Podyssey from just a $5 a month. And now, here is the recording of that Q&A on Prometheus to go with last week's episode. Enjoy!
Right, so welcome to the very first Podyssey Invitational, I guess. I'm Alex Andreou. I usually am your narrator on the podcast, in case you don't know me. And I have with me today Dr. Debbie Chalice. Say hello. Actually say something, Debbie, so that
Hello.
your camera bursts onto everyone's screen. That's Debbie. She's our cultural historian. She's from the Portico Library, although I think she's dashed home. Like the Portico Library is not that cozy. And I am especially thankful as Debbie gave up the company of none other than Mayor Andy Burnham to be with us tonight. So
I persuaded him to go to Athens, Alex. So
I'm very grateful. Yes, you left him in the capable hands of the Greek consul, apparently. So we will try to keep it tight and interesting, although good luck with that. Whenever Debbie and I get together and start talking mythology, it's basically 3 hours later. and we haven't moved on from topic one. So I'm going to start by talking through a few things that really I had to ditch out of the episode to keep it to time, because they're slightly ancillary things, or they would just take too long to explain. And then we will open the floor up to you for any questions you can have. I've got already a few from people who wrote in. It's quite appropriate, I guess, that Prometheus is the first episode that comes in this unassuming shell of a Zoom. I think I'm just about recovered from pandemic Zooms. They don't trigger me in the same way anymore. So let me start by saying a tiny little bit about the process of putting an episode together, because a lot of you have been asking me about it. So I know it's a question that's sort of out there. And the truth is that most of the time the process is a little bit mysterious, in that I often don't end up where I thought I would at the beginning. It's almost like the story takes me by the hand at some point and sort of takes over and goes to its own places. And this was particularly true with this episode, to the point that it was kind of a surprise even to the experts who contributed to it, where it went. I just crammed my head full of all the information, and then I tried to put it in an order. And by doing that, by putting it in order, things emerge, patterns emerge that I actually hadn't seen at the start. The first thing I want to talk about is the different kinds of myths, because Prometheus is actually a really good story to talk about the different types of myths. If you cast your mind back to the episode, there was the myth about the trick at Mekone, which is where Prometheus tricked the gods into accepting bones and skin from the sacrifice so that the mortals could have all the choice cuts and the meat. And that's what we call an etiological myth, because it's there to explain something that was happening anyway. So people wanted to keep the good bits of meat for themselves, and so they invented a myth that explained why this wasn't a huge disrespect to the gods, but the product of something that had actually happened and made it so. And then you have myths like the myth of the Titanomachy, which are sort of creation myths. They're cosmological. They're to explain things that people can't possibly know, how the world came into being, how it happened. Then you have myths that are completely psychological. So Aesop's version of the myth, which is that Prometheus made too many human vessels, ran out of human souls, so then he had to give some people the souls of animals. That's basically a psychological myth. It's to explain why certain people behave in a particular way that you might consider sneaky or violent or fearful or whatever. And so you have all these different kinds of myths. And we always go into the episodes accepting that things don't happen by accident. In a fairy tale, in a constructed narrative, just like a movie, just like a book, things are not there by accident. As long as the person knows what they're doing, stuff that's in there is in there for a reason. This will be really, really clear in the next episode when we talk about Pandora, because one of the things that emerges is that there is no point in having a prohibition in a story unless it's going to be broken. There is literally zero meaning to saying, don't do that in a constructed narrative unless someone is going to do exactly that, or at least be very tempted to do exactly that and have to resist it. So in a constructed narrative, everything has a meaning. And that takes me to something I did leave out of the episode, which is the etymology of the name of Prometheus and his brother Epimetheus. Now, the central school of thought is that it comes from pro, which means before, and manthano, which means think, to think. And basically, the two together mean forethought. So he's the one that has forethought, which makes Epimetheus the one that always thinks of things too late, afterthought. There are different schools of thought that it comes from the Sanskrit Prometha, which means a thief, but I find that quite difficult to sustain because of the presence of his brother Epimetheus, because then Epimetheus means after thief, and that makes very little sense, basically. But I have seen a very good scholar suggests that Epimetheus, who is the kind of dumb brother, also could mean he who learns from experience. Because manthano is not just to think, but it's also to learn. So if you take that meaning of Metheus, then Epimetheus is the one that learns from mistakes, which makes Prometheus the one that thinks he knows everything. Quite a different meaning, quite a different contrast between the two brothers. And I know that Debbie has been thinking a lot about the meaning of Promethean as well, the sort of modern product of that myth and what that has come to mean. Because you have wavered quite a lot between various meanings while we were talking about this.
Yes, I couldn't always make up my mind, honestly. So, I mean, I think it came up in the episode we did on Midas and the kind of Midas touch and what that meant. And I think with Prometheus, to me, Promethean is as important certainly in modern senses of reception, because it's used a lot, particularly since the sort of late 18th century. And equally, it can be used in two meanings. You know, it can be used as overreaching, which is kind of what you're talking about there. It can also be used as a kind of sign of genius as well. So there's a kind of, you know, is it a good thing or a bad thing to be Promethean? It can mean both. And that's what I find so interesting about it, really.
And the two things often go together, don't they?
Absolutely.
So it is the people who at least consider themselves to be a genius who tend to overreach, who tend to think, which is why it became such a poignant conversation about the Elon Musks and the Mark Zuckerbergs of this world, that there's always a set of people that think they are so clever that the rules don't apply to them. And it was only through telling the story that I started to think, hold on, could Zeus be right, actually? Could it be a big problem for people to just go, well, that doesn't apply to me. I'll just make up my own rule for it.
So change the laws to fit themselves. That's why I said to you, I was surprised the episode went that way, because, you know, I know we had this discussion, but it wasn't kind of where I thought it would go. But then I don't always know, and I could see why it did. And actually, it kind of takes me to, you know, I was telling you about this book that I've been reading. It's only just come out by a classicist, an American classicist called Curtis Dozier. And it's about the impacts of Greek and Roman force and mythology and ideas on the white nationalists in America. I mean, it's very American. It's very kind of based on that. But there's a chapter in it called Promethean. And it's about this idea that, well, I'll read a bit. Prometheus might himself be recognised as a sanitising symbol of European violence and alleged superiority because the rules don't apply to him. So basically what's that saying is he can go out in the world and colonise and conquer. And that's the kind of idea, that's the kind of white European thing to do. This is why white nationalists see him as a hero.
Yeah, because we're giving other people the light of civilization, basically, so it's all right.
Yeah, that's the idea. And actually that whole thing about fire, it comes in with, if you think about it, the role of the gun in conquest, in colonisation. And we talked about the Rockefeller Plaza. There was that, you know, Prometheus, the golden Prometheus, which I loved when I saw it.
Yeah.
But actually he kind of talks about it in a different way, in that, you know, basically there used to be around it a mural by the Mexican artist Diego Rivera, and that was removed because it was seen as anti-capitalist.
No.
So actually, you know, it doesn't look as it used to look, but he said, you know, people read it in a different way because it's read as this kind of triumph of capitalism, if you like, and this triumph of, you know, the Rockefeller family and leading the lights in a different way. I must admit, when I saw it, I didn't read it like that, but you know, that just shows you that you can read Promethean in lots of different ways, which I thought was really, really interesting.
And one of the ways in which really your reading of a tale differs sharply is to do with the time frame you put it in. And one of the things that I found in researching the episode is that there was a different anxiety about something always, something new that was going to destroy us somehow, that was too much for us to handle, basically. It's AI now, but it was automation in the 70s, and it was the atomic bomb in the 50s and 60s, and it was the Industrial Revolution before that, and the printing press before that. There's always something that, I mean, I'm not saying that anxiety about the atomic bomb was not well placed. Plainly,
It is well placed.
It was well placed, and still is, yeah. But what I'm saying is that to read the people of the time, they are just so utterly, completely convinced that this is it. In the next 5-10 years, we're done as a species.
Some people embrace it. I mean, obviously, I'm, I've just rushed home from Manchester. I live a little bit outside of it, and if you think about the steam engine, people were convinced this was the end of the world. The first steam line was from Liverpool to Manchester, and on its first journey, it ran over an MP. I mean, it's completely bizarre. But other people absolutely believed in it, invested all the money in it, thought this was the next thing. And this is the thing about this word Promethean and how it relates back to the myth, is that you will always get people going, oh, this is the end. This is, we can't possibly, then you get the atomic bomb, of course, you get atomic energy and think different things about that. But arguably it's a kind of non-carbon using energy. So is it entirely bad? So there are these kind of different ambiguities about it. And actually it's interesting you said about the atomic bomb, because although I watched Frankenstein, I know we were sort of getting to that, I watched Oppenheimer for the first time when it was on over Christmas. And I thought, again, there was something very Promethean about that story. This person overreaches, and there is kind of elements of him being Prometheus in that and not thinking things through.
Yeah, completely. Yeah, that it's the other meaning of Prometheus, thinks he knows everything and the rules shouldn't apply. So actually, since we are talking about Frankenstein, you also thought in looking into what the other two plays, because Aeschylus wrote 3 plays and we've only got 1. We've got a few fragments of the second one. And also we've got other trilogies. So we know how the shape of it might have been, from punishment to a sort of purgatory and then some kind of resolution. So we understand the basic shape of it. And it's interesting that while you were looking at that, Debbie, you came to the idea that this isn't a tragedy with a very tragic end. I mean, yes, Prometheus suffers, but so did Mandela. Is Mandela's story a tragedy? We don't think of it that way. We think of it as a triumph. We think of it as a story of him prevailing. Yeah. And so I was wondering, thinking about that and thinking about the anxieties that we have about technology, does it change the way you think about Frankenstein?
Yeah, that's something that I was thinking about, because, the subtitle of Frankenstein is The Modern Prometheus, and it's startlingly so when you actually look at a copy of the book. And I always say, nothing better than talking about old books. And actually, I just had out our copy of Frankenstein, the Podyssey, which is the first illustrated edition, and it has the monster and Frankenstein kind of creeping out the door. And it's interesting looking at that, because that's the edition that Mary Shelley changed herself. So she tones down the incest. She makes it a little bit less tragic, actually. She kind of gives an ambiguity at the end. So she actually changes the text. Some people think it makes it less radical. Yes, it does. But I think you've got to also think about the time. This is 20 years after she's written it. Technology has moved on. There are trains by the time that illustrated version comes out.
That's interesting. I hadn't thought of that.
It's the 1830s. So I think part of what she's doing with it is kind of going, actually, the technology has moved on and we are dealing with this rapid change. And I guess what I was thinking about, what if Frankenstein did it again? And not necessarily him, but what if it led to something that's a bit like Promethean or the Prometheus creation?
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? So it's like, if this is the first step, well, maybe that is a tragic step, but then what if the next step is not so, and we learn from that, and we learn from the suffering, and then we do something else? I'm not saying that's the right answer, but it just made me think a bit differently about that text, actually, and about what particularly Mary Shelley was doing with that later edition. I don't think she was necessarily making it less radical. I think she may have been doing it to sort of keep up with what was going on.
Yeah, no, that's interesting. So we're going to move on to questions. I would ask you to either put your hand up if you want to ask a question, understanding that this may mean fame and immortality. You make it into the audio edit of this episode, or you can type your question in the question box. I've got a few here that people have emailed in, and I can start with Alex. How do you choose the music? Alex, how do you choose the music? I have no idea. I mean, maybe you can see behind me the chaos of the records. First, I go to the direct and literal, basically. So I will look at what operas does Prometheus appear in, what pieces of music have been written that are explicit about Prometheus, what songs have been written about Prometheus. Then I will go to the themes. So fire or rebellion or stealing something. And then usually for the last song, I will go to the subversive. So I will find something that is explicitly not the thing I'm using it for. I will find a love song and make it creepy, or I will find a revolutionary song and make it a love song. And that's basically the process of choosing the music. But I find that the hardest thing to edit of all, because every single time there are dozens and dozens of things that demand to be let into the episode. And Naomi has to keep telling me, not everyone loves opera as much as you, so tone it down a little bit. And I have taken that advice. There's another question from Melanie. It's to me, but I actually want Debbie to answer it too. So Melanie says, as a theatre person, what do you think of Aeschylus Bound as a play? So I think, weirdly, I mean, tragedy is quite Brechtian anyway, in that it's epic, it's very stylized, it's very static, it deals with big themes, people wear masks. There is quite a lot of Brecht elements in there. But on this particular play, where you're dealing with a guy tied to a rock, and then things like the state come along to have a chat, it's sort of extra Brechtian, which means that it's not actually my bag. I'm sorry to say. I hope I haven't upset a lot of people. But for me as an actor, this style that requires you to kind of remove yourself from the audience, put distance, and get them to engage their brain rather than get them to engage their emotion is the worst thing you can ask an actor to do. Although I understand it's very enjoyable for directors. But what's your view, Debbie, as an academic? Because I imagine you take completely different things out of it.
Well, yes. And I think it's an interesting one because it's not, when you study it, it's not one that you study for it's not actually much studied in when you do tragedy. You tend to do, if you do Aeschylus, you tend to do, partly because you've got the full cycle, you do Agamemnon, but it is one that poets come back to. And I think it's not just, I think it's really interesting as a work of poetry and a work of ideas. So, I mean, it's a long time since I've been at university, obviously. But if you do it at university, that tends to be where you do it. But the Brechtian thing appeals to me. I mean, I'm much more, I guess, into that. And then we talked a bit about the one where she's on stage and she's just stuck in this kind of rock.
Yeah, the Beckett one.
The Beckett, yeah. So we were talking about Beckett, and I found that kind of idea quite really interesting. But yeah, it tends to be talked more about in the poetry rather than the stagecraft. So I'll be honest, it probably wouldn't be one I'd want to perform if I was an actor.
Yeah. Can I take a question from you now? Who wants to put their hand up?
There's a couple in the chat.
Oh, that's very good.
Yeah.
Debbie, you often mention having seen a particular work on your travels. How important is it to see a painting or sculpture in real life? Is it sometimes a disappointment?
Well, the cliche of the Mona Lisa, I would say, is a bit of a disappointment, but I've only ever seen it once and it was very crowded. I think it's even more crowded now. So I would say not usually. Actually, if anything, it's much better to see things.
Yeah.
To take the Acropolis, you can see a picture of the Acropolis, but to actually stand there and be able to see the sea and to really get a sense of the vastness of it and how high up, even on Athens today, it's just, I find it, and revisiting places, it changes with age, seeing the Bellini sculptures, we talked about in the first series a bit of, some of the not even rapey, that is just rape, and just seeing the kind of fingers pressed into the flesh is not something you would see in a reproduction in the same way. And I think there's, particularly for 3D, there's something about the 3D of seeing them.
Every time we talk about something, you will say either it's much bigger than you think,
yeah,
or it's much smaller than you think. Or I remember when you were describing the Medusa on the shield, you said that the amazing thing about it is that it's kind of concave.
Yeah.
It's painted to look perfectly realistic at a weird curve, which I guess makes it more exciting.
Yeah, exactly.
Is there something that, I don't know, like the Guernica or something like that, that you were just simply bowled over by the sheer size of it?
I confess I haven't seen Guernica because I've not been to Madrid, but there's something to do. I must go.
Yeah,
I know.
on the list.
I know. So I have things to look forward to. Yeah, I think actually for me, going to the Uffizi and seeing Primavera, that's enormous. But the thing about it is when you stand in front of it, it's really immersive. You can sit there for hours. Well, I did. But you can sit there and just stare because it almost feels like it comes around you. Because there's a kind of depth, there's a 3D-ness about Botticelli when he's at his most enormous and best epic. That one in particular feels like you're in the forest, in there with spring. And so for me, that was definitely one. Going back to Greece, I feel that actually seeing the sculpture, seeing where things came from. I've just finished co-editing a book, and actually the person that I'm writing about is a guy called Charles Thomas Newton. And if you go into the British Museum, there's an enormous lion in the Great Courts, and he's responsible for that lion being there. It was found at Knidos, which is on the western coast of Turkey.
Oh, wow.
And he says, that the lion was made for that cliff and the cliff was made for the lion. But of course, now it's in the Great Court. But he actually says something similar about Parthenon sculptures that, you really have to go to Athens to understand looking at them.
Hello. Can I ask a question?
Yes, certainly.
I really like your episode on pets. I asked the question, so thank you.
Hi, Becky.
Episode. Hello. It was such a lovely episode. I really enjoyed it. One of the things for me that actually changed my perspective and has made me actually change the kind of way I am with my own pets. I had two questions. Has any of the stories or the episodes that you've done really fundamentally changed the way you see things or you behave or yourself, Debbie? And the second question was, did it make a difference to the storytelling kind of starting from the end point and going back? Because most of them, I think, start with the myth and the ancient Greek and work forward. So it's kind of two questions.
The timeline definitely is important. And I will come to demolish it this season. I went close to doing so in the Persephone episodes. But this season, in the episode about the three fates, we will really mess with time and place. Because one of the things about Greek mythology is it's not linear. Like if you look even at the genealogy of people, the grandchildren of this deity are also involved in the past of someone who's meant to be their great-grandfather. So there is a cyclical thing that goes on, and it will really come to life when we talk about the fates, because the fates episode made it very clear to me that the ancients had really developed concepts of relativity, essentially. That everything is happening at the same time. And it's not that the fates decree it, it's that they're seeing it take place. It's taking place all at the same time. It doesn't mean you can't change it. You can. But you're basically in a loop. And everything, the past is the present, and the present is the future, and everything is happening at the same time. So in that way, we will play around with the order in which we do things, not to spoil it too much, in the episode. And then what was the other question?
And has any of the episodes, and for you, Debbie, as well, kind of changed fundamentally how you see things in your own...
Why don't you go, Debbie, on that one?
Yes, it's more that I tend to put things next to each other. So I think for me, it kind of opens up how you look at a myth or how you look at a story, and you contextualize it. And I mean, Alex will know this, I can read too much into things sometimes. But it's making those jumps, if you like, because I've generally, in my own research, it tends to be the 19th, perhaps the 20th century. What I think has changed for me about this is following one thread through. So, like looking at Prometheus and like realising when interest in him comes about, because it does often change.
Mm-hmm.
So like Aesop, much earlier, medieval period, and Caxton, and that with Prometheus, it's a bit about 100 years later that he's really starts to get people interested in him. And then you see the gaps. I mean, certainly we talked about Sisyphus, really 20th century. So for me, that's really changed how I look at things. That is really interesting to see how some things come in and out. There's some that are the same. I think there are certain myths that carry on. I think Persephone is one of them. But I think there's some that seem to come in and out of consciousness, and very much depending philosophically where we are as a kind of culture. And
so do you think that the stories that the societies choose reflect that moment in time, and therefore you get that kind of swing?
Yeah.
Definitely. We kind of wrap them around what's going on at the moment, and they take that shape. And they are their own delicious covering, but they're wrapped around a very different shape every time. And to answer your question, the one that really changed how I think about politics, actually, was the three-parter on Aesop, because it made me think about why certain political segments are so much better at telling stories than others, and why facts lose out to a compelling narrative, and they will lose out every time. And I was thinking about Brexit, for instance, about that writing on the side of the bus. 350 million goes to the EU every week. Let's fund our NHS instead. And everyone that was against Brexit jumped on the amount and said, no, that's not true because we get a rebate. And, but they actually reinforced the story. The story was not about the amount. The story was that money is leaving here and going over there to some mysterious entity. So to argue about the quantum was to confirm that this was going on, instead of saying, yes, but look at everything we get in return. Ditto with the whole birther thing about Obama. The Democratic Party got into a tizzy trying to publish birth certificates, and then they would just be claimed as fake, because that wasn't the story. The story wasn't about the facts of Obama's birth. The story was that this man is from somewhere else. He doesn't belong. It was about his race. And so it has genuinely transformed the way I look at politics. It's like you have to take the facts, but you have to make them a compelling story. Otherwise, no one cares.
Doesn't that expand also to the national story? So it's that layered approach to narrative.
So, of course. And we talk a lot about the national story in episode 3, which is all about the myth of Europa and how she's brought over by this bull, and suddenly a continent is created. Not just a continent, a white continent. This completely imaginary line that didn't exist before that says behind here is we, and from there on is yous. Yes, absolutely. It works on many levels. People share stories. They don't share statistics. The story we tell ourselves is never about facts and statistics. And that should give you a clue as to how you can reach other people. Right. I have a pair of movie-related ones. Max asks, what do you think of the Ridley Scott film Prometheus? Personal view, it is utter dog shit.
I think I'd agree with that.
Say what you mean now, Max. Yes, it is utter dog shit. And if I were to speak about it, I would make it much better than it is, because actually the most interesting bit of it is that Prometheus symbolism, because it is quite ambiguous. Prometheus is so universal that you look at that film, for instance, and it's impossible to tell who is the Prometheus in it. Is it the alien engineer race that destroys himself to basically seed a barren planet to create humanity? Is it the human tech tycoon that refuses to accept the rules and invents technology to basically make himself live forever, going against natural order? Or is it the android, David, who decides he's not going to listen to his creator because he's petty and stupid, and actually he's going to do what he wants to do in the exploration of knowledge? And it's impossible to tell. The truth is, it's all of them. And there's a question here from John. that asks, is it possible now to get past Prometheus' Christian successor, reimagining as Lucifer? John, I would say that Lucifer literally means bringer of light. And it is about a fallen angel that transgresses, gives humans knowledge, and is punished for it eternally. But there are also big elements of Prometheus in Christ. This person that accepts that they must sacrifice themselves in order to save humanity. Even the look of it, the twisted, naked body on the cross, the wound on his side, all of that is really, really Christian imagery. So again, I keep coming to this thing, not just with this myth, but with every myth, that the ancient Greeks, they didn't like binary stuff. They didn't like something to be one thing or the other. They liked things that were plastic and open to interpretation and slightly shapeless, because they are the myths that are the most useful to a population, because you can adapt them, because you can go along as a bard and tell the story your own way to that particular audience. Like stand-ups amend their jokes depending on what town they're playing. Right. What do we have? We have Max. Your analysis of the film does indeed make it more interesting than it deserves to be. Now, it should have been an interesting film, and it wasn't. Evelyn asks, Musk Bezos. Hi, Evelyn. Tim Berners-Lee gave the internet to the world. No patent, no royalties. Where does he fit into Promethean theory? Where does that fit? He was the one that was kind of generous with a gift, that did give it to humanity. And I do think that is a huge dividing line with the Elon Musks and the Mark Zuckerbergs of today. There is no sense that they will ever give this thing to humans. They are here to rent it to humans at the highest possible rate.
Yeah, and control people too. That's the thing. I think that's the difference. Prometheus isn't necessarily about control in that way. It's, he gives the fire to humans, and then leaves them to do it. It's not, he doesn't tell them what to do with the fire.
Yeah.
Is there a happy ending? Does he get released? Actually, are things better? You just need to get used to it. You have the tragedy, you have the suffering, and then things get better.
Yes, I think provided that there is an ethical framework. We're running behind the technology to try and regulate it in a technical way, because there isn't an ethical framework there to say, what should you do and what shouldn't you do? Like, what should be the aims of this thing? It should be to enhance humanity. It should be to make our knowledge richer. It should be not to harm people. The moment you lose that ethical framework, then you go into a technical discussion of, if I ban this site in this country, will people get a virtual network and log on from a different country? That's not the point. When they legislate to regulate things like AI or things like social media, they should go to first principles, because it is actually a philosophical question. What do you want this thing to do? So if the legislation says, you must make sure your thing doesn't hurt children, you don't need to go into technical detail. That seems to me perfectly clear as a legal aim. When you regulate for electrical devices, you say, if you're going to market this product, it needs to not explode. We accept that. We don't go into some big, complicated explanation, but plugs are a bit tricky and they do sometimes explode. It's like, no, you're the person that wants to sell this thing. Make it not hurt people. And I don't understand why we don't adopt the same strategy with technology. I think there's a kind of technophobia where we think, it's complicated. I don't understand it.
But I think that's always been the case a little bit, because back to my steam engine analogy, part of it is the system we operate in. And certainly in the 19th century, they didn't want to put rules in place. It was very laissez-faire. And that part of the story of Britain is the laissez-faire, never wanting to tell people what to do exactly.
Yeah. Unless they're foreign people.
Well, no, of course. That's a different.
Very happy to tell them what to do then.
Absolutely. But if you look at Bazalgette, or you look at improvements to health, or steam engines, or regulation of railway companies, or how things were, didn't come in until lots of people died. Do you know what I mean? So it's kind of like, it's like they learn, and then people are like, no, we don't want to get cholera. We actually want to understand where it comes from, all of that. So I think there's always been an element of technophobia, but also an element of we should let capitalism have its way. So
yeah. I could not tell, says Debbie. I don't think you asked this of yourself. Are you having some sort of existential crisis? No. I think it's a different Debbie. I could not tell whether you enjoyed the symbolism being made more explicit in Guillermo del Toro's Frankenstein. Is it a form of dumbing down? Are we living in a more literal age than the ancients or even the romantics? Wow.
Well, I did actually enjoy the symbolism. I think my problem was that the film was too long, and that I kind of... But I'm sorry, but it's like the Branagh Frankenstein. It went on for hours, and you're just like, Frankenstein is small. It's on my bookshelf. It's like a tiny book. You know, why do filmmakers feel this need to expand it when the story itself is so amazing? And I actually enjoyed the beginning of Del Toro's Frankenstein. I thought that was actually nicely placed, but actually it looks stunning, it looks amazing. I just got a bit lost about halfway in, and I felt like the castle with all the limbs all over the place and all that sort of... I mean, I know what he's doing with the Gothic, but it's kind of... It just, to me, went on too long.
Yeah.
You know, it needed a bit more editing, is what I felt, but...
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah. I agree with that partly. I can kind of see what it was. It was, in a weird way, a stitched-up monster of Shelley and Del Toro. And so the penultimate question, which feels appropriate, is from Sabina, who says, do you have to work hard to find optimistic epilogues to the episodes, or is it just how you really see things? It is genuinely how I see things, and that's part of why this process is so lovely, because actually looking at things over such a length of time, you get the sense that we've been through worse and we've come through it. Things always turn around. The pendulum swings one way and then it swings another. And that makes you a little bit philosophical, I guess. It seeps into you by osmosis. So all that is left for me to do is to say good luck to Tanchira, who's doing a quiz tonight that includes a category in Greek mythology in a bar called Chimera. I mean, so I will be thrilled if you end up winning on something you heard on Podyssey, Tanchira. And the very last question is the very maddest one. Simon asks, appointing a new Spurs manager, is it a Sisyphean or a Promethean punishment?
I don't know. I could talk about being a Man United manager.
I know. I mean, not to bore people who are not interested in football, but basically we're on our 7th manager in as many years. And I would say, Simon, it is both. It is Sisyphean for the club and the fans because we keep doing this thing and it never works and we have to do it all over again. And it's probably Promethean for the manager because they get to be there and have the liver pecked out every time a result doesn't go their way until they get unceremoniously dumped. Are there any other questions? Are you having more fun with the script and recording? Yes, I am. Thank you, Mike. It has been better this season because I sort of know what I'm doing. I know what length I'm aiming for. I know what length I am not aiming for, more importantly. I was saying to Debbie just before you joined that last year, this episode would have been a 3-parter that spanned 6 hours. But I really, really tried very hard to contain it and keep it within a 90-minute single episode, which I think is where the podcast works best. Anyone else? All right, my lovelies, I'm going to let you go. Thank you so much for coming, for being my guinea pigs. We will improve the technical side of things. We will tighten up the format of the thing, and more people will listen to the sort of conversation we're having and hopefully join us in 2 weeks' time. Thank you so much for coming.
Thank you.
Bye.
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 Podyssey is an audio production for Cooler Heads, written and presented by me, Alex Andreou. For an illustrated guide and an invite to the live Q&A for each episode, sign up now at ko-fi.com/Podyssey. Creative input, sage advice and expert contributions by 4 goddesses who inexplicably continue to make time for this hapless bard: Alexandra Angelotakis-Reux, Debbie Chalice, Amanda Potter and Dr. Ruth Smith. Music by Mariana Sangita, artwork by Simona Canelu, additional research by Cosman Zakos. Alex Andreou's Podyssey is a Cooler Heads podcast.